Alright, what's going on, guys? So at this point we are a little over a month removed from the release of Elden Ring's DLC. And by now I've played through it 3 times. A lot of you have finished your journeys as well, and while by nature of a game like Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree will have stopping power for a long time, the initial honeymoon phase is starting to peter out just a little bit. Not to say that there isn't still hype around it, but a lot of the casual audience is starting to look towards other games coming out soon. And so today I have to recognize something. As a FromSoftware fanboy, and someone way too obsessed with Elden Ring, I'm not ready for this to be the end. Now a lot of you are going to be asking, well, why do you think it's the end? And the simple answer is because we have a lot of reason to believe that it is. And I'll explain why we think that, but what I want to mainly focus on today is why I personally don't think that if this is the end, that it's a satisfying send-off. But in addition to that, if there's any possibility that Elden Ring gets revisited, and what we may see in the meantime. But of course, as we get into that today, if you enjoy all things Elden Ring and FromSoftware, and want to stay up to date on the lore and discussion, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and now let's begin. First and foremost, let's start off by talking about where we currently stand with Elden Ring as a franchise. And if you remember, a franchise is what they were calling Elden Ring for the longest time, suggesting that it was going to be their next big universe that several games were going to be set in. And of course, Shadow of the Erdtree was going to be part of that franchise, building off of Elden Ring significantly. And while it did do that, if you were keeping up with the news in the lead up to the DLC, then you might have saw headlines like this: "Don't get your hopes up for Elden Ring 2 despite Miyazaki saying it's possible." And these articles came out after Miyazaki did an interview with IGN Japan, where he had this to say. When asked about the future of Elden Ring and whether or not the DLC was the true end, he said, "I think I said the same thing about Dark Souls 3 in a previous interview, but I don't intend to say that this is the end. I don't think there's any need to kill off future possibilities or good ideas that may be born in the future. However, there are no plans for additional DLC or Elden Ring 2 at this time. Even if it's not the complete end of the story, I think this DLC will be a big turning point." So he does explicitly say right there that they currently have no plans for more Elden Ring, and we can make some fairly safe assumptions off of that. Number one, the fact that he is explicitly confirming that means that they're probably not working on any of the groundwork for a future installment, which inevitably puts us at a long time away if they were to start anytime soon. In my opinion, a minimum 3 to 5 years. But at the same time, that likely means we'll get different games from Miyazaki in the meantime. Now, I'll speculate on that later, but this interview also happened after FromSoftware bought the IP of Elden Ring back from Bandai Namco, making them the sole owner of the Elden Ring name, which means that whatever decision they want to do with the IP of Elden Ring is in their hands, at least from a legal standpoint. But while that is a good thing from a creative stance, FromSoftware isn't the most keen on sequels, which is why of course we don't have Dark Souls 4 or Sekiro 2, Bloodborne of course being a different story. Again, great thing for creative integrity, but for us greedy fans, it might be a nail in the coffin, which brings me to another thing that I found interesting that happened only a few days ago. Remember that talk about Elden Ring being a franchise? Well, they seem to have removed that marker from Elden Ring's store page. Now, I'm not sure how much to read into this, because of course Bandai Namco's name is still attached, as they are still the publisher, but I just find it interesting from a semantic standpoint. If they really weren't planning on doing any more games, then that would be something they'd want to remove, as to not create unnecessary expectations of more installments in the future. Because obviously when somebody sees the word franchise, they're naturally expecting a wide net and more games. Now, why am I opposed to the idea of Elden Ring ending here? Wouldn't that be the sign of a creative genius to know when to stop something? Well, to be honest with you, as I said, I'm just not satisfied. I'm not ready for this to be the end. And that's not to say anything particularly negative about the DLC. It's just that they've crafted such an expansive world here and such compelling characters that I'm not ready to leave them behind. And I know there's going to be a lot of people in the comments that are going to say something like, well, you knew FromSoftware was going to do this. You knew they were going to have a lot of loose ends, and they weren't going to answer every question. And absolutely, you're 100% right to say that. But that's based on FromSoftware's history. Elden Ring is a different animal. The foundations of this game's story were much better placed than Dark Souls. The characters we have here were much more involved. There was real drama and real consequences to the item descriptions and the lore behind all of it. That's why these loose ends sting a lot more. And to simply say that we knew it wasn't going to be completely resolved is, in my opinion, an unfair cop-out. Now, do I think everything needs to be explained? Do I think we have to have resolutions to every character arc in Elden Ring? No, but I'll give you some examples of things that still don't sit right with me. we're now supposed to accept that the Frenzied Flame ending cliffhanger with Melina is never going to get explained, and we'll never get any more clarification on her story as a character. The very clear and obvious ties between Mikola and Ronnie will never get explained, nor anything to do with the spirit world, which was continuously hinted at in the base game. We'll never know the truth of the Night of the Black Knives, who all the conspirators were, and why Godwyn the Golden was chosen to be killed. There's a lot left out about a time of peace when the demigods worked together and shared their thrones at the foot of the Erdtree. Why are the two fingers so different and powerful compared to the finger creepers if they're both children of Metzer? What is the red spear that we see impaling Queen Marika at the end of the game? And those are only scratching the surface. There are so many more unexplained questions, and I would hate to just be left with speculation forever. And while we can speculate to get somewhat decent explanations about several of those questions, we're never going to know anything for a fact. I think in a sense it was a bit of a mistake to make the DLC so disconnected from the base game. Not to say that any of it was bad, but it just didn't satisfy those cravings I had for the lore. Or perhaps a better way to say it is that everything was so good that I don't want to accept that there's not more down the line, if that'll make sense. And I think somebody else that would agree with that sentiment are shareholders, because I don't think I need to remind all you guys how well Elden Ring sold. They made billions off this game, with a B, and I think the shareholders would like to see that continued, even after this DLC. So what do I think is on the horizon? I think it would be safe to assume that we're going to get more Armored Core. That may even be their next game. And while personally, Armored Core 6 is one of my favorite games ever made, I absolutely loved it. Sadly, it wasn't super popular with the FromSoftware base, simply because it's such a big shift from the Souls-likes that have become notorious. They just announced a few days ago that Armored Core 6 sales had crossed 3 million in a little under a year, and for comparison, Shadow of the Erdtree had around 5 million within a week. Now, one of the reasons that another Armored Core is a safe bet is because Miyazaki is only one fraction of the games being developed at FromSoftware. There are a lot of other directors that are leading games aside from him, which gives us a good possibility of something like Sekiro, with how it wasn't set in any of FromSoftware's current universes, but expanded on their core formulas, trying something new in the process, which would be a new IP, but still keeping most of the Souls-like formula. Now, one reality that we do need to discuss is that we could get more Elden Ring, just not as a game. And here's what I mean. Kadokawa, the parent company of FromSoftware, has been investing very heavily in other media forms for Elden Ring. We have about 5 or 6 different Elden Ring mangas now, and George Martin was recently hinting about an Elden Ring TV show that's in the works. I'm not personally opposed to the idea, however, I'm gonna be pretty disappointed if they decide to address things that we didn't get to play in the game and create new lore canon that way, mostly because I think there's a very low chance of it actually being good unless George Martin is involved directly, but based on recent interviews with Miyazaki, where they've asked him about a potential movie or TV show, it sounded very clearly like he's not involved. But that is where we stand currently with the future of FromSoftware and if we're ever going to get more Elden Ring. Unfortunately, it's very unclear at the moment. I think within the next year or two we may get more explanation on what their plans are, because I think purely from a business standpoint, the chances that they absolutely never touch the Elden Ring universe again are very low, and personally I need more. But you guys let me know what you think down in the comments section below. I just wanted to come on here today and talk about this because I've been thinking about it a lot, but if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.